This is an emergency alert regarding the fifth-hour tragedy. If you keep staying awake at night and you hear the barking of dogs, then very soon, after 5 hours of hearing the barking, you will face these 5 or one of these 5 terrifying outcomes. Let us reveal to you why this is happening, who or what is responsible for it, and how to survive this terrifying phenomenon. The first known encounter began with Daniel H. He was 28, a night shift worker in Ohio who kept odd hours and a dog that liked to peer at the street. One week he was scrolling forums and watching shock clips well past midnight when the dog's bark cut through the room. Single, precise, the kind of bark you shrug off. Daniel filmed the dog and captioned the clip to friends, mocking the noise. He stayed awake. Exactly 5 hours after the bark, light felt wrong behind his eyes. A searing pressure flared and the world tunneled into a gray blur. He blinked and waited for it to clear. By dawn his vision had failed. By the afternoon neurology could find no structural cause. He was examined, scanned, poked, and the scans were inconclusive. Daniel did not die. He woke to a house of shapes he could not name, to a life converted into touch and sound. The punishment was specific, his sight taken, permanent or effectively so. He learned the room by sound and counts footsteps for comfort. Every now and then he reaches for the place the dog used to sleep and finds emptiness where the animal will not go. Daniel was left permanently blind, and despite all the tests, no one could explain what caused it. His life would never be the same, trapped in a world of darkness with no answers. Then came Layla M., a 32-year-old mother from just outside Lexington. She stayed up that night after the bark, laughing at a live feed that derided neighbors and strangers alike. The next morning, her husband found her standing at the child's door with mud on her feet. She had no memory of leaving the bed. A hallway camera later showed her rising and walking the house in a way she had never done when awake. Quiet, purposeful, whispering names under her breath. For nights she moved like that, harmless, confused, a sleepwalking script repeating. She remained alive and they tried interventions. Alarms, locked doors, waking attendants. The rule investigators began to see was as cruel as it was precise. The sleep acting continues so long as the walk remains harmless. If the sleepwalker harms, mocks, or deliberately humiliates someone while in that state, the mark escalates to fatal consequence within the same 5-hour window tied to the initiating bark. Layla lived for weeks in the haunted gray of that pattern, always a risk, never knowing whether a night that began by staying awake would end with harm she could not recall. Her family keeps watch now, because survival in this outcome is not safety, it's a fragile line. Layla survived, but now lives under constant watch, speaking in her sleep, walking without memory, and trapped in a cycle that could turn fatal the moment her unconscious actions cross a line. Aaron P. was next. He was 24 and kept a fitness band that logged his nights in Michigan. He heard the bark and did not go to bed. That night at 5 a.m., he felt his limbs refuse him. The sensation began as familiar sleep paralysis but deepened into something else. The pressure on his chest was heavy as a hand, then many hands, the room colder and the corners darker than they had any right to be. He felt shapes lean over him. He felt being struck and dragged at a point where nothing left bruises he could show a doctor. In the morning he shrugged it off as a nightmare, laughed to friends, until it returned the next night. Again at 5 hours after the bark he lay immobile while the dog whined and paced, and the recorder on the nightstand captured sounds he would later insist were not dreams. Low scraping, a rhythm of breaths not his own. He survived. He woke the next day, insisting to himself and others that it had been a dream. Others who lived it report the same cruel split. The night is full of visitation that leaves them trembling, and the morning offers a plausible explanation they cling to because the alternative is intolerable. Aaron survived physically, but every night after the bark, he was trapped by paralysis and unseen visitors, haunted by a terror that felt real, even when daylight brought only doubt. They kept him scaring and beat him every night in the state of sleep paralysis. Then there was Michael R. He was 45, stubborn in his disbelief and loud about it. He lived in Wisconsin and used the late hours to play and to mock warnings online. The bark on his block became a provocation. He met with defiance. He stayed up many nights. The first 5-hour window after a bark left him restless and edgy. The second left his judgment frayed. By the third, he was making choices that would have seemed reckless before the mark, driving late, picking fights, leaning into dares that should have seemed trivial. The mark for some people is not sudden, it is attrition. Michael's nights piled into months of fear and sleepless stress until the dread was a living thing in him. He grew thin, distracted, and finally careless in daylight because the night had stolen his baseline. After weeks trapped under that pressure, he made a choice in the dark that ended him. An accident during an impulsive, unsteady drive. In his file, the path reads as anxiety, insomnia, compounding poor decisions. The slow fate is a cruelty that eats a person from the inside, surviving night after night but becoming someone who cannot make the safe choice and so eventually meets a terrible end. Michael didn't die from the bark itself, but the relentless nights of fear and sleeplessness broke him, leading to a fatal mistake that ended his life far too soon. Then there is the thing nobody will name in full. Emily R., 19, streamed for a following and dared viewers to keep her awake when the dogs started barking down her street in Illinois. She laughed and provoked, played games to bait the hour into being a spectacle. Her feed showed the room with harmless pranks until 5 hours after the bark. The frame breaks into static, a final still of her mouth stretched in a way witnesses later said was not speech. The few who saw Cash seconds in private could not speak of them beyond shuddering and shaking their heads. The police sealed footage and gave families only thin, clinical statements. Officials refused to allow graphic recounting. Clinicians closed the file and code it restricted. The pattern for those who mock deliberately or make spectacle of the bark is a fate so private and so injurious that it is withheld from public record. We do not describe it here because public description is precisely what investigators protect against. Know its category. Public provocation leads to an outcome that survivors cannot translate into words. Emily's fate remains a silent warning, an unspoken consequence reserved for those who mock the bark, a horror so profound it defies description and escapes all attempts to explain. All 5 of these outcomes share a single, exact trigger pattern. A dog barks in the night. You hear it and you remain awake, scrolling, gaming, filming, or mocking. Exactly 5 hours later, and not on some vague schedule, one of the consequences unfolds. The variable the silent parade measures is the human reaction. Watching wrong videos, committing mockery or cruelty, staying awake to make a show, acting while sleepwalking, or simply refusing to sleep until the pressure becomes a life-ruining force. Dogs see the procession first. Veterinarians who have examined affected animals report consistent behavior. Pupil changes, a tightening around the muzzle, an expression owners call a half-smile. Then a single bark, identical across recordings. That bark is a clock. The parade passes and it counts. It does not break down doors. It does not need to. The mark is made by your choice to remain awake and engage. If you hear the bark tonight, do these things and nothing else. Put your phone away now. Close your apps and your games. Lie down and try to sleep immediately. If sleep will not come, lie perfectly still in the dark and do not speak about the sound to anyone in the house. Do not go to windows. Do not film. Do not taunt or provoke. If the 5-hour mark approaches and you are still conscious, cover your eyes and breathe slowly until you fall towards sleep. Darkness is what correlates with survival in the files investigators have shared. These steps are not talismans. They are observed correlations from interviews, recordings, and medical notes. They reduce risk. They do not promise safety. So if your dog barks tonight and you are awake, do not test the claim. Do not delay. Sleep now. Turn off your devices before you are marked.